As the second season of the anime is coming out soon, I want to revisit my oldest video on who played with each other in the first selection. As both the main story and episode Nagi have developed, we have gotten more information about the possibilities, and I want to give a proper update and do it correctly this time. And by correctly, I mean making corrections, using all 125 survivors including the background characters, and discussing any potential differences between the anime and manga. If you never saw the first video, the basis is that the shoes represent the team they played for in the first selection. For example, Team Z had blue shoes, Team Y red, Team X white, Team W green, and Team V black, and for the most part is pretty consistent to formulate a rough estimate of their teams. As we know, there were 300 people who entered Blue Lock and separated into 5 different stratums, and each stratum consisted of one of the 5 teams with 12 people in it. We then had the gamer tag where one player was required to get eliminated, like Kiyora, leaving 11 players per team. As for the first selection, the top 2 teams survived and the top scorer of the 3 remaining teams made it too, for a total of 25 players per stratum. And so coming to the second selection, we have 125 people survive the first selection, meaning a lot of the characters played with each other. Well, the first stratum to talk about is Isagi's, because we know everyone involved. We have from Team Z, Kuon, Raichi, Imamaru, Iemon, Naruhaya, Gagamaru, Ikaguri, Batra, Chigiri, Kunigami, and Isagi. We also have the other surviving team, that is Team V, including Nagi, Ryo and Zentetsu, plus their fodder teammates like Ebuna, Torikai, Nerama, Midorikawa, Hohai, Atatame, Hijikata, and Namoto. Then finally, the top scorers of the stratum, including Baro, Nico, and Wanama. So we now know 25 of the 125 players who made the second selection, and we can focus on the remaining 4. So going back to the 35 survivors, we can write off 12 of them from the original stratum, and now try to figure out the remaining 23 connections. Before jumping straight into the characters, I do want to talk about the teams who survived. From both the main story and spin-off, we saw Isagi and Nagi see people from other Team W, X and Ys. Isagi sees a Team W player with a number in the middle of the Team W range. It means he wasn't the sole survivor in his stratum, but survived in a team. And similarly, we see a Team X and Team Y also have numbers in the middle of the team's range. That, coupled with the fact Nagi observed different numbers from Isagi, means of the potential 8 teams that at least one of each of the Team W, X and Y survived. Another thing to consider is the rules in the first selection. To get eliminated, it would require you to lose around 2 games. Characters like Rin and Shido are insanely good, and even in the third selection were tiers above the other survivors. And for them to not survive would require them to lose multiple times to fodders and other survivors, which I doubt since a lot of the other strong players were from Team V. And so the first thing we have to do is group the characters by their shoe color, and so we get something like this. But I do have to mention that there's a difference between the manga and anime, leading to mixed interpretations. Characters like Kiyora have green W shoes in Season 1, a game, and even the manga, so it's fair to assume that he's a Team W player. But then there's characters like Saguma who had Team Z shoes in Season 1, but had Team W shoes in the manga in Season 2, and similarly someone like Ishikari and Tanaka have differing shoes between the 2 media too. And so for this video, I intend to just use the manga colours and hope the Season 2 anime fixes their shoe colours. So onto the actual characters remaining to discuss. In the previous video, the stratum captains were Rin, Shido, Hiori and Nanase, but this time I'm going to do it slightly different and use the top 6 as the stratum captains, who are all Team V players. Rin and Shido seemed unfamiliar with each other, but both having Team V shoes, meaning they were from different stratums. Whereas we know for a fact that Toya and Karasu were teammates in the first selection on Team V. And as we see from the Team A vs B match, it seemed like this was Rin and Shido's first interactions with Karasu and Toya, leading to the 3 different stratum captains so far. Then finally we have Yukamiya. In the Team A vs C match, it seemed like it was his first time playing against Rin and Shido. He could still hypothetically be from a Toya and Karasu stratum, but seeing as how he was ranked 23 in the second selection and didn't team up with them, who had higher numbers, then I'm leading to believe they were in different teams. There's a big emphasis in Karasu and Toya as a duo, and no mention as a trio. And the other reason is because when Ego talks about the top 6, he says it's their evaluation from the first selection, second selection and the World 5 match. so I think there's a good chance he picked the best from each stratum, meaning our stratums can be separated into Rins, Shidos, Karasu no Toyos, Yukimiyas, and finally Nagis. And so going back to the remaining characters, we can cross off the stratum captains. And now the next character I want to discuss is Hiori, as this guy single-handedly causes the most confusion. Something to note is that in both seasons of the anime, in the game, and even in the manga, he has black Team V shoes. And so you'd think he'd be a Team V player, but in his backstory he was given rank 291, which places him in Team Z. So which one is it? Well, the artist is kind of bad with numbers and makes a lot of mistakes. In the third selection he gave Endoji and Sentetsu the same number. For a brief time Ishikari was given rank 25 before being fixed to 13, and even the jersey numbers were wrong in the NEL. And so it could be a genuine mistake or actually intentional. Judging by his introduction to Shido and Rin, I'm less likely to believe he was from their stratums. As for the other two, Karasu's stratum is definitely a possibility whether it's Team V or Z, as we see characters with previous relationships such as Isagi and Kiyora, Ryo and Nagi, and the one of my bros with Chigiri end up in the same stratums. But instead, I actually think he is from Yukimiya's. And this is simply because in chapter 39, when all the teams were gathering together, we see two of Hiyori's teammates also there. And so I'm inclined to believe Hiyori survived on a team and was not a sole survivor. But there's a big issue with this. If Hiyori's team survived as a Team Z, that would mean the remaining stratums include a Team W, X, Y, and Z, which seems fine on paper. But if you think about Nanase, he's the only other character with Ikiguri to be stated as bad and lacking skill, which is why his growth in the NEL is so amazing. Since Hiyori and Nanase didn't know each other previously, and how I mentioned Nanase probably needs a teammate to survive, like Tsunsaki and Endoji, then that would mean of the 8 surviving teams, 5 of them were not Team V. Which would mean that one of Rin, Shido and Yukimiya would have to end up as a sole survivor, which sounds so off as I mentioned earlier, as it would require them to lose multiple times. Which is why I think there's a good chance it was actually an error and from Team V instead. We see 6 people in Karasu's team and 7 in Hiyori's, so if they were unique people on the same team, then we would have 13 people, which is too many. I do want to say there is a guy in the back with black hair who could be someone from Karasu's team, making it 12, which is a valid number. And if this was true, we would have their complete team. But I think it's more likely he was from another stratum and on Yukimiya's team. We can't discard the other people entering the room with Hiyori's teammates, because they were from the same stratum too. We see both Aryu and Tanaka, who are Team V players, standing around his teammates, which would not be possible if Hiyori was in Karasu's team. And another potential issue is that Rin, Aryu and Tokimitsu were in separate stratums. And so if we knew all 11 people in Karasu and Hiyori's team, then Aryu and Tokimitsu must be in the other 2 remaining stratums, and it would require a lot of changes in the teams. And so overall, I think it's very likely that Hiyori is from Yukimiya's stratum and team. With another character down, I may as well continue with my other confident predictions, and that is the duo Aryu and Tokimitsu. When Rin, Aryu and Toki formed the team, it was confirmed that those 3 had no direct relationship prior to meeting each other, meaning those 2 must be in different teams of the 3 remaining stratums. I just mentioned in Hiyori's section that his teammate resembled someone next to Aryu, and so I'd wager he was in Yukimiya's team too. But the other reason is about a character's theme and dynamics with teammates. For example, in a spin-off, which stratum would make most sense for these characters? Personally, sticking Aryu in the same team as Yukimiya, who is known to be a model and truly glam, makes perfect sense, as their dynamic enables the characters to bounce off each other. Then for Tokimitsu, the best dynamic between either option would be Shido's stratum, as you have this hyper-violent character with an anxiety-ridden scaredy cat who is physically insane. Like if there was a spin-off episode Shido, then he would be the best and most entertaining partner that could be assigned together. So I do believe that Tokimitsu was on Shido's team and Aryu and Yukimiya's, as they are both plausible options with the best potential dynamics. And now that we have 2 more characters crossed off, the next character I want to discuss is Tanaka. One thing to note about him is that in the anime he is Team W shoes, while in the manga's Team A vs Team C match, he is Team V. In season 2 his shoes may get updated to the correct colour, but either way I'm pretty sure he was part of Yukimiya's stratum. Similar to Hiori and Aryu, we saw him stand around their proposed teammates. Although Tanaka was fodder, we have a bit of characterization from him where we know his character theme and portrayal is more of a gross person. And once again, I want to bring up character dynamics as I think it works extremely well with Aryu and Yukimiya. On one side you have this glam beauty, and on the other this gross beast with negative glam. And so overall it seems like Yukimiya's stratum is the most likely, and it doesn't really matter if he is a Team W or Team V player, he should at least be there. Back to the remaining characters, and I want to continue with another Team V player, Hiroki. Now in the anime he had Team X shoes, while in episode Nagi in his proper introduction had Team V shoes, so it could be either one. We know he had his phone implying he scored at least 3 goals and traded in for it, and for what we've seen in the spin-off he is really good, so it's believable he could be a sole survivor for Team X, or he just does extremely well on Team V. If he was a Team V player, then you have to consider his second selection. Hiroki was ranked 22 and he formed a team with Nico and Sentetsu, but Hiroki's philosophy is about rationality. So if he was teammates with Otoya or Karasu, then the rational play would be to form a trio, but he didn't. The same goes for Hiori, Tanaka or even Yukimiya. All those people had an opportunity for him to team up with, but he chose Nico and Sentetsu. So in my eyes, he is from one of the other 2 stratums. In Rin's case, he formed the team instantly, and so Hiroki may have been ditched by his only other competent player, thus why he looked for 2 new members. Similarly, Tokimitsu was forced into a team by Rin and Aryu, and so if Hiroki finished, he wouldn't be able to team up with him, and Shido is well Shido, so he may not want to team up with him, or he formed the team before Shido completed his test. So he could be from either stratum, but I'd favour him being from Rin's. I don't think he really fits the dynamic of Tokimitsu and Shido, and I think sticking the player that is a hybrid of Isagi and Nagi as Rin's teammate makes more sense, as they were the ones to confront him most in the story. Now going back to the remaining characters, I want to talk about Ishikari and Nishioka. In both the anime and manga, we know Nishioka got injured, so we never got to see his shoes specifically, whereas we see Ishikari being a Team V player in the anime while Team X in the manga. I partnered these 2 up because we see them standing next to each other with the bald headed guy in the top 15, and we also see some of the other people standing with them, who could be teammates or part of their stratum, but I'm fairly certain that this was the Team X that survived. In Karasu's backstory, we see them play against Team X and no one else from that match is seen in the second selection, so they won't be in that stratum. As for the other 3, it's a bit harder to guess. We only see a portion of Hiori's team, but the other people standing there are likely from that stratum too, meaning there'd be too many survivors for Nishioka's team. And so I'm thinking Nishioka's team is either from Rin or Shido stratum. We do see Tokimitsu call him by his title, but that doesn't say much about their relationship. I do want to mention when Kunigami and Ryo are talking to the other 2v2 losers, we have one person say that he was from Shido stratum. Some of the people involved in this interaction look like Nishioka's teammates, where the black haired bun guy could be him. The only issue is at the same time we have Aryu and Tokimitsu asking teams for a match, and we see a character with a similar design. And so it's a 50-50 if it's him, but I think there's a chance they were from Shido stratum. So the next character I want to talk about is Himizu. The anime never actually had a shoe color, and so it was a random guess last time. But with the spin-off, he's a bit of a weird one, since his introduction had him as a Team X, changed him to a Team Z the following chapter, and then reverted him back to a Team X the following. So it could be either one, but seeing as how he has white shoes more often, I'll interpret it as that's his team. Since we already know Team X, then I'm fairly certain he was a sole survivor. We know he was partnered with Karasu and Otoya, 2 known strong players, and he seems to get along with them well. And so if I had a guess, I'd pick Karasu's stratum, but a sole survivor is a bit harder to predict. Now the next character I want to talk about is Nanase. I mentioned earlier that he's one of the few characters to be called out for lacking skill, so I think his chance of being a sole survivor are low, just like how I think Igaguri surviving by himself is low. He is the Team C player, and judging by his interactions with the other 3rd selection members, he didn't know them. But since he is on a different team, it's excusable if they haven't properly met yet, and wouldn't necessarily be a retcon. But I still believe he survived on a team, and my hunch is telling me Karasu's stratum. The only other 2 Team C players are Ondoji and Tsunzaki, seeing as Suguma's shoes were changed. then I believe they were his teammates in the first and second selection. Sunzaki and Doji are the pair of players that are always together, whether it be getting food, standing together, or talking before the NEL. They seem to be one of the closest relationships, and them being teammates makes sense, especially since they survived the second selection together. And so I'm guessing this trio were a team and they were from Karasu Stratum. However, I do want to mention that Endoji's shoes aren't actually confirmed to be Team Z in the anime, but we do see a manga snippet where his shoes do seem to resemble them the most. And so I do still believe he was a Team Z member and the three of them survived on the team, and likely in Karasu Stratum. With 3 more characters down, I do want to talk about the next one, Kiyora. As we know, he is a Team W player, but a question now is whether he is a sole survivor or survived on a team. We know his philosophy is about surviving on the borderline, and to me that means he barely survived the first selection. And so on one hand he could be a sole survivor where he outscores his teammates in order to survive the borderline. But on the other hand, it could mean just like how Isagi's team survived, that Kiyora won his final game against Team Y and his team barely survived thanks to him. As his presence determines the victor and Team W surviving thanks to him, it works with his character theme. If he did survive on a team, then I believe he didn't have any of the other Team W survivors and basically carried his team to the second selection. As for a stratum, it's a bit harder to guess since he could really go in any of them. Like he could play against Shido and Tokimitsu and lean into the provoking aspect of his character, or he could be from Karasu Stratum which could prompt their 3v3, or even in Yukamiya Stratum where he could potentially be tied as the top scorer. And if I had to guess, I would say he was in the 4th stratum and survived on Team W. And while we're talking about Team W, we may as well talk about the other 2 Team W survivors, Suguma and Saramadara. As for Suguma, we know his shoes were updated to match the manga, and we know they didn't know each other coming into the 3rd selection, so they should be in separate stratums. But something to note is that in episode Nagi, both characters were highlighted to be top prospects coming into Blue Lock, and so it's believable they could be sole survivors despite their performance in the 3rd selection. And in this Team A vs B match, we see Karasu and Otoya be very dismissive to their talents, and so I'm leading away from them being from their stratum. For Saramadara, we know his character associates with waves and surfing, and so I think thematically the best stratum for him is Rin's, since his character is also about water. And then for Suguma, I'll guess he is from neither Kiyora nor Saramadara's stratum, and I'm guessing he is from Shido's as a sole survivor for Team W. But I still want to reiterate that sole survivors are a bit harder to guess as they are pretty flexible in where they go. So the next characters to talk about are the Team Y players Corona, Haiji and Sakura. Now we know at least one Team Y survives, so at least one of them should hypothetically be on the surviving team. In my previous video about who beat Bara and Nishioka, one of the proposed options was the trio of Yukamiya, Haiji and Sakura, and if that's true then I'm inclined to believe they were the duo in Team Y, and given my predictions the only stratum without 2 teams already would be Rin's. But before jumping to Corona, I want to talk about the rest of the team. As we know, when the teams were walking in, we saw a bunch of background characters and we see a team with a character that looks like Yuzu but taller and hair reversed. And we see him stand next to the guy in the loser's gate and another player with a Team Y emblem and not the highest number. So potentially this group of people are part of Team Y too, or at least part of the stratum where a Team Y survived. He has the 2nd highest number, which could mean only one of the Team Y survivors were in that team, but since it's something the author likely didn't think of at this point, I wouldn't look too deep into it. But I'll still put them in the same stratum and predicting that Haiji and Sakura were the teammates in Team Y. As for the final Team Y player, we have Corona, who I believe was just a sole survivor. As for a stratum, it's a bit hard to guess as we don't really see him interact with anyone, so he could realistically go anywhere. Maybe he was in Shido's stratum and that's why they play against each other in the 2nd selection. Or alternatively, I think he could be in the same stratum as Kiyora and we have the final Team W vs Team Y game decide which team survives, which would be Kiyora's. And with the Team Y players discussed, we are down to our final character and that is Yuzu. He is the Team X player and so I'm guessing he isn't from Nishioka's team and was the sole survivor instead. This would leave only the other 2 remaining stratums to be available. Now I do briefly want to talk about my headcanon prediction where I'm guessing that Yuzu is the younger brother of the person I mentioned before, and is in Reen's stratum, as I think having a younger and older brother dynamic being observed from Reen's perspective could be an interesting side story. Now altogether it would look like something like this, or at least that is my prediction, where Hiori was in Yukimiya's team. Now there could be variations like Hiyori being a Team Z player and looking like this, or even in Karasu's stratum, which would look like this. But like I said at the beginning of the video, I do want to do this properly, and so that involves looking at all 125 survivors. So I've made little icons and reasonably found around 100 or so characters for the remaining fodder teammates. We know the original 25 from Isagi's stratum. As for Yukimiya's, it consists of people from Hiyori's proposed team, as well as the people standing around Tanaka and Aryu. We can have the guy who was paired up with the bushy hair guy also from Hiyori's team, and then have the surviving Team W include Kiyora and the 2 people from the top 15. The 2 people highlighted at the bottom who we also see in chapter 1 can be the remaining 2 sole survivors, and the final third one can be Corona. Then as a story, we have Team V stomp every game, and we have Team W and Y both go 2-1, defeating the fodder teams before their final game, where we have Kiyora barely defeat Corona's team, and he survives the borderline with his team. As for Karasu's stratum, I'm guessing it would be from Nanase's perspective, where we could have Himizu be the burrow of Team X, and have Nanase in the position where he can either pass the Sunzaki, who is Raiji, or Indoji, who is Kunigami. For Reen's stratum, we can have the first game be against Yuzu's brother, or have him on his team, and with Haiji and Sakura, they probably have an okay showing in their first Team Y game. Then they can have the Saramadara match against Reen, which goes exactly how you expect, and finally we have the Team X game against Yuzu. Reen will still win, but it will be more of a mental battle than a physical challenge. And then finally the Team Z game will just have him deal with his internal thoughts. Then the most fun stratum would be Shido's. We have the game of tag where maybe Tokimitsu tries to eliminate him, but in the last second Shido eliminates someone else, something Kiyora couldn't do. Then his match starts with him being excited and having fun in the Team Y match as he teams up with Toki. The Team W match against Tsuguma could continue his excitement, especially against a powerhouse player similar to Kunigami. And then they go on to first Nishioka's undefeated team, determine if they get first place, and it ends with an extremely close match. Then finally the Team Z match has him deal with his boredom as no one sparks anything on that team. And with that, my predictions are done, and thanks for watching. And as always, Buddha be praised, take care and have a good day.